Hello everyone, I'm Oliver, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and yes, my hair is very poofy today, but I just washed it yesterday and I do not want to put product on it. Also, I was going to record with glasses because like if I look down straight into the camera, like the glare is not too bad, but I realized that was a stupid idea because obviously I'm gonna move, and so glasses off, let's get into the video. Not to jinx it, but I feel like I have the mic thing figured out. Fingers crossed. Um, I've tried a number of different setups, including no mic, but something happened with my camera. Anyways, um, let's just get into the video. I'm actually recording this a bit further in advance. So usually to upload on a Tuesday, I would want to record on a Sunday or a Monday. But I had so many like backlogged books to tell you about that I decided to record now so as to catch up a bit, and then you'll see what I'm currently reading. I won't have that much to talk in the next video, so I think it's okay. All right, I have notes. I'm trying not to turn my back on the mic as much because I've noticed sometimes where I'm like looking for stuff and I'll be like, hey, and kept talking like nothing is happening. And obviously, that's bad. I'm also trying to cover the mirror as much as I can to varying degrees of success. But hey, let's just roll with it. You just care about the books, hopefully. So number one, I want to tell you about Sonetos del Amor Oscuro by Federico García Lorca. That is Sonnets of Dark Love. I think it is available in English. If it is, I'm going to put an edition right here at this second. This is the edition that I got. Basically, I have a complete works of Federico Garcia Lorca in Spanish that I got secondhand. It's a beautiful edition. However, that came out, I think, in the 70s or maybe the 60s, and this collection wasn't published until the 80s because it's basically really homoerotic and really dark, as the title says. So I was missing that, and I couldn't find an edition in Chile. And of course, in Spain, they have little booklets editions, like all the collections proper. And this edition also has a lot of Garcia Lorca's drawings because he was quite the artist. He did this very specific type of line art that is very haunting, a bit surrealist, very beautiful. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this collection. I don't read much poetry in Spanish for a variety of reasons. So I always find the language strange, if that makes sense. Like, it always feels very mystifying of Spanish. I don't know if that is because this is, a very particular Spanish tradition or what. But in any case, it was both really lovely and really harrowing. My mom read this as well, and she told me, oh, he was really going through some stuff. Yes, mom, being gay at that time and, all the Spanish political issues. I'm sure it was getting to him for sure. But yeah, it was very baroque. The language was very, you know, ornate and passionate, loads of allusions to nature, but as something sort of wild, a lot of desire and sort of the richness of desire, both in terms of how nice and exciting it feels, but also how harrowing and heartbreaking it can be. This tension between how lovely romantic love can be and erotic love can be, and how terrible and heartbreaking and painful it can be, and how those are not two separate things. So yeah, I really recommend it if you like poetry, if you like sonnets, if you like love poetry. These are a lot of bangers, so yeah, check it out. The second book I have to tell you about is one I've hauled in the past this year. I don't know why I said in the past as if it has been a lot of the year. But yeah, I hauled it early. No, actually, I hauled it last year. I think I got it literally on the 30th or something like that. Maybe the 20 something. Um, in any case, this is Alien Daughters Walk into the Sun by Jackie Wang. And this is one of my favorite books that I read this year as well. I know I keep saying that, but what can I say? The reading has just been that good. This is a compendium of Jackie Wang's zines, Tumblr posts, reviews, some journals, and it is fantastic. It's so good both because she's had an objectively interesting life. When she was quite young, she sort of took to the road and she lived in a punk creative commune, and she's been in several sort of queer art scene. Um, so she is herself a very interesting person, but also her thoughts and her analysis, and she's very interested in prison abolition, in queer politics, in queer strategies. And what I love about this is that everything is quite symbiotic. Her personal and affective dimension informs her politics, which also inform her creative writing and her aesthetic outlook in life, and all of that is very intermingled, and I really, really love that. I also love that these are juvenilia effectively. She talks in the introduction about how a lot of these pieces seem to her now half baked, or that could have used some editing. A lot of these pieces, as I said, were published on Tumblr, so maybe they didn't go through the rigorous external editing process that some of her later pieces would have gone through. But still, she says, I find so much richness in them, and that she thinks, the youthfulness and the creative impetus of it is very rich and worth returning to. And I completely agree. I think there's so much substance here, but there's also so much freedom and so much thinking about academia and academic structures and sort of systemic issues, and how we exist within and outside them, how we're all interrelated, how friendships come and go, how loves develop. It's all so exuberant. There's so much life, but also it's like very thoughtful, because she's a very sort of thinky person and she analyzes everything. And it's just, I don't know how to even explain how I wish I had read this as a teen, but also I'm really glad I read it now, because there was something about her writing that felt so creatively stimulating, and it felt like, yeah, why can't I write like this? Why can't I do this or that creatively? That was really good. Also because she did end up doing a PhD at Harvard. She thinks a lot about her status as like, have I sold out? Or what does it mean that someone like me is here? What power do I yield now? How do I use it? How does this affect my creative practice? Which I also found really interesting and more relevant than ever. So yeah, I really, really, really love this book. I got a lot of ideas as well that I hope to incorporate into my research that I hope to be doing this year once I get back to Santiago. So yeah, I just highly recommend it. If you like On the Road by Jack Kerouac and the beats and that, but then now you acknowledge all the problems, both aesthetically and politically, check this out. It has that same vibe of just going to see what life throws at you and trying to make art out of it, but in a much more interesting, obviously feminist and queer lens. So what's not to love? Number 3 is another banger. I read Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, and it's so good. It's so good. So this is about Andrews, who goes west to Butcher's Crossing, which is like this little town that is booming. It's supposed to become really big because the railway is going to go through it, and at that time, because it was all so secluded, if a railway was built, then like a proper town could flourish there, and a lot of like towns flourished at the time. He gets there. He has been studying transcendentalism under Emerson, who is quoted in the epigraph in one of the best usages of epigraph ever. Sadly, I don't have the book with me because basically I was traveling with my parents, so a lot of these books have gone back to Chile, so they can be there waiting for me in my library. Underneath, there was the sort of counterpoint to the William Andrews project, which is like, what do you know, you transcendentalists? What do you know of actually being out there in nature? That is really interesting because, again, if you think about Thoreau and the whole Walden thing, he was such an inspiration for so many academics, but then in the end, he wasn't actually being self-reliant and living off the land. And it's sort of the same thing here. This dropout from Harvard, was it Harvard? Yeah, I think it was Harvard. He thinks, oh, I want to see the world. He doesn't even have a clear project. And so he gets into this town and this man offers him a desk job. And he's like, no, I just want to see the country. I want to learn things. What does he want to learn? Who knows? But he has all these transcendentalist ideas. And so he finances and embarks on this hunt to hunt for buffalo hides. And this is a big theme in frontier literature and Western literature because that was like a big tragedy that buffaloes went extinct because of overhunting. And it was a whole thing. So they go and there's this phrase basically it goes wrong for many reasons. And it just sort of slowly disintegrates into like all these people's dreams and it's just okay. But early on there's this line because basically one like the head of the expedition, he's a very seasoned hunter, and he says something like, yes, we are traversing the place that I thought, but everything's changed and everything's different now. And I mean, I'm misquoting it, but when you read it in the text, it's just so harrowing because there's this idea of progress and this idea of things moving on and people being left behind. But also, yeah, I mean, they are no heroes. They are there to massacre buffaloes to make money. There is this tension between, you know, the quote-unquote American dream in the Western sense and someone who had left maybe the like Eastern American dream and left like the educated city life to come to the quote-unquote uneducated like Western life. John Williams writes, it's such a subtle prose that seems just realist and normal, and then the quiet subtle devastation that it submerges you in is just undescribable. Really, you just have to read the book and find out. I still don't love it more than Stoner because, again, Stoner feels like it was written for me specifically. But I really, really, really love Butcher's Crossing, another candidate for top book of the year. I just really loved it. I don't read too many Westerns, but when I do, this is what I expect. Like, this is what I want to be reading. Next, a very different book and very different feelings on the book is Culture is Bad for You by Dave O'Brien, Mark Taylor, and Orion Brook. I thought this was going to be a very sort of interesting political commentary on the UK creative industry and obviously classism and racism and all of that. It's not that that's not the position of the authors. It's just that this is very clearly a sociological academic work that was published by, fair enough, Manchester Uni Press, but it's packaged so much for the general reader. But unless you are completely oblivious to anything that happens in cultural industries in the UK, you won't get much out of this because it's mostly case studies and surveys and like data. So if you're a policymaker, this I'm sure is really helpful. But it doesn't have any ideas, if that makes sense. And that sounds mean, but what I mean is it's mostly about the data and saying, hey, you know, this is what class engagement looks like, this is what race engagement looks like, this is what like gender and queerness and all of that. So it's like I knew that, so maybe for other people, but I found it very dry. And someone needs to do that job. Someone needs to compile data about who works in the industry, who consumes the industry, how much people are getting paid. That's all fine, but again, unless you are completely oblivious and or are conducting research for policies or for your own dissertation, I just can't see how this would be a good read. Sorry. I didn't DNF it because there were some parts where, like some terms that they used, I found interesting. So they talked about the idea of the somatic norm, which is basically just saying that the default is straight white men. But that concept of somatic norm I really liked. And then they also talked about the dangers of narratives of creative industries being a vehicle to erase people's working class backgrounds, as if the working classness itself was bad, instead of, I don't know, maybe still treasuring that background and that sort of creative baggage, but make it more accessible. You can't do everything, and someone does need to do the legwork of creating data so we know the facts. But yeah, I just felt like I didn't really learn anything, and it was also very dry, and I didn't even hold on to this. I just left it at an apartment. So maybe someone who does need to read it will read it then. I also got and read Vigil by George Saunders. So pleased to have this book. Obviously, it's just out in hardcover right now, but this is the international edition. I got it in Barcelona. I got it at this amazing bookshop my friend took me to called Finestres. They sell books in many languages, and they are all mixed up, which I love. I think more cosmopolitan places should have stuff like that. Obviously, Barcelona is bilingual, as in Catalan and Spanish, but also they had the English stuff and the French stuff and some German stuff, Italian stuff, just all mixed in, and I think that's great. What a great, fantastic idea, especially in Europe. Anyways, I'll stop gushing about the bookshop and talk about the book. Spiritually, it's quite close to Lincoln in the Bardo, as in exploring what death has to say about life, using the dead and spectrality as a manifestation, a physical manifestation of, metaphorically, our impact on the future, if that makes sense, and how people remember us by using ghosts. It starts with this woman that at first it looks like it could be an angel. No, I wouldn't say it's a spoiler to say she's a ghost, but it does sort of, it feels ambiguous at first. And she's falling, and she's, there's one very good word for it, but it's like becoming embodied. Because she has a charge, she needs to transition this huge, important man who may or may not find some parallels in some men that are on the news all of the time now. He has been a direct cause for climate catastrophe. She's trying to make him repent, basically, so he can go on. It could have gone so wrong. I actually think I read on his newsletter that he had worked on this like 10 years ago, and then he had to pause it because he just sort of didn't know where to take it, and then because of everything that's happened, it sort of jumped back at him. I might be lying to you because I haven't fact checked this, but I do read George Saunders' free newsletter. I seem to remember this was the case. And in any case, it's obviously a very prescient novel, although it's not dated to today, and the person is like a fictional person. His name is K.J. Boone or K.L. Boone. Very sort of bozo name. Also, Boone, I feel like, has historical implications anyway. The challenge with a book like this is, how do you end it, right? Or where do you take it? Because you can be either really cynical or be really cliche and, oh, he repents and everything's nice. And it takes a true master like George Saunders to navigate that and not do one or the other, but also not be lukewarm. I thought for a second he wouldn't land the ending, but then after I finished the book, I felt this thing and I thought, I need a second. It took me a little bit to get into it because, again, I was a bit, oh, he's done this ghost dialogue heavy thing, but I stuck with it because I trust George Saunders and because there was something still pulling me through, and I'm so glad I did, because if you can get past the seemingly cliche setup, you'll find much to love about this book and much to enjoy and think about. I like that it wasn't extremely cruel or cynical, but also it wasn't softballing it, and he was being a bit satirical with the big man. So something that's quite funny and a bit petty is that he makes him really short, and that's a sort of a complex that he has. But there's so much more than that as well. You see how someone who's so evil thinks about himself and rationalizes his own evil. So all of this to say, I really, really, really highly recommend it. If you like George Saunders, you're going to love this. If you haven't read him yet, this is a good place to start. If not, just go for the short stories because they are great. The last book that I finished that I want to tell you about is Extranjero en Todas Partes by, oh, I always forget her name, Mercedes Halforn. She is an Argentinian academic. This is an account of Witold Gombriwicz's time in Argentina. I talked about this, I think, in my Gibraltar book haul, link down below and in the eye as always. I talked about how ever since I read Sergio Pitol's La Trilogía de la Memoria, where he talked about being the first translator into Spanish of Witold Gombrowicz. Well, he wasn't really the first translator, actually, because Witold Gombrowicz translated his books himself with the help of some other people, but in any case, Sergio Pitol was tasked with translating some of his books, and I will read one of his translations later on this year. But in any case, I just talked about how I've been sort of fascinated by the figure of this man, and after reading Extranjero en Todas Partes, I now know why. He's just like really interesting. He was a very famous Polish writer in his own time, and then because of that, he got treated to go to Argentina on a ship that was sort of an official visit, but then war broke out and the ship had to leave in 2 days, but he decided to stay in Argentina. He didn't speak the language. He barely knew anyone. Thankfully, he was sort of in the aristocracy, so he got by with some contacts, but even then, there were days where he barely ate, and it's just really interesting, an objectively interesting story. He was quite brilliant, but also a misogynist and gay, apparently, but obviously because of the time, I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, not every queer person hated themselves at that time, but he had this repulsion towards life and people sometimes. He could be quite difficult, but he also apparently could be very jovial and, you know, very friendly. He was just a character. This very short book, I don't even know if it was 200 pages long or not, really captures that essence. It's, as I said, an account of his time in Argentina that has elicited a lot of fascination. There's another book that just covers his time in Argentina. I mean, he did spend there 30 years and wrote a lot of his masterpieces there, so that makes sense. But still, there's a documentary. Slowly he began building his reputation, but a lot of authors didn't like him, both because he was a bit nasty and also because they didn't believe in his literary project. For example, Borges. But then he also had his following by the end of it, and people who really liked him, both, again, as a person and as an author. So very interesting, divisive figure, and this is a great, great biography. Again, it's a small biography. It's very narrative, but it doesn't jump into conclusions, or when it does, it's very clear about it. It uses his journals, letters, his own writing, published interviews, but she also conducts her own interviews, and she talked to academics that study Gombrowicz. She talks to people who might have still been alive or who are close enough to people who were still alive to conduct her research. So it's such a well done work of biography. So interesting. I do hope this gets translated. I can see that it will, because I don't think Gombrowicz is having a moment right now. I think he might be too dark, maybe, for... I mean, I haven't read his fiction yet, so who knows. But, yeah, we'll see. But I just think it's such a good example of biography, and what a biographical project that's not a huge entire life of someone biography might look like. It was also just engaging to read. If you think of this as a novel with a character, it would have still been engaging. And yeah, I just really recommend it if you're reading Spanish and you like biographies, regardless of whether you are interested in Witold Gombrowicz or not. Speaking of dark books, the one DNF that I need to tell you about this week is very shocking. It was very surprising to me, but I DNF'd The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. Very unpopular opinion. I love Clarice Lispector. I love how she writes, and I loved this book at first. I loved the fact that it's this author-narrator that is sort of a disembodied voice, clearly a stand-in for Clarice Lispector herself, and he's sort of willing this character to life, and this character is a poor young woman who's had a really difficult life. It's sort of just following her, but the magic is really in the telling, which is like, oh my god, she's with me and I need to tell this story, but how do I tell it? And I understand why writers love it so much, because there's a lot about writing as creation and sort of how that parallels the existentialism of life. What does it mean that I'm creating this character? How God would have created us. Sort of. It engages with religion and God as well. So all of that is really interesting. Where I couldn't get behind, and obviously the writing is beautiful, but what I couldn't get behind was how condescending the author, well, I guess the narrator, like this character, I think his name is Rodrigo, is towards this woman. At first it seemed like, and maybe this is the whole story, and I keep saying maybe this is the translation as well, because I read it translated into Spanish. At first it seems class commentary that is very sort of judicious, and obviously Clarice Lispector, she had an interesting upbringing, because I think she was linked to the aristocracy, but she did experience extreme poverty when she first came to Brazil. And even in the introduction, it did say that she was always a bit shocked and repulsed whenever she came back to see how her servants lived. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just talking about the text itself. There was this one line that I really loved where it was like, you who are reading this, obviously you're not like her because you can't read. If you are poor, you don't have time to reading, stuff like that. And the way it was written, it did seem more okay. But then it just got worse and worse, and all of the comments are like, oh my god, this is such a tragic story, and poor girl, and I'm sure it is, because that's why I stopped. It just seemed a bit misery porny, and I don't know, it's just, there wasn't enough in the writing for me to withstand that. I was just not enjoying it. It might be a translation thing, it might be that I wasn't in the mood, that I was reading these things under an uncharitable lens. Let me know what you think if you've read this book. I think the introduction does engage with this a little bit though. I read the introduction after I had decided to DNF it because I was interested. I think the introduction sort of implies that that's what's going on, and some of Clarice Lispector's critics did engage with this. I'm not saying she didn't have sympathy, but this sympathy seems so condescending. And then also the fact that she chose a male name for this narrator. This was also her final novel. It just makes it all feel even ickier, and that was a narrative choice. And again, I do understand that some of the negative affects that I'm feeling about this novel are intentional, but then some others I feel that are more, that's not what was intended, but it is on the text. So I DNF'd it, but I am willing, I haven't gotten rid of this book, I am willing to revisit it. If anyone has any thoughts, please do let me know, because I would be so curious to know. Okay, let's quickly move into the currently reading. This week, I finally plan on finishing A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I've already spoken about this twice, so I'm not gonna summarize it again. I'm just gonna review it next week, but I just wanted to have it on your radar. Right after that, I'm going to start The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig, which is translated by someone. I should be more prepared. But also, they should put the translator on the cover. From the German by Anthea Bell. I hold this earlier on. I was planning to read it in Feb anyways, because it looks so good. But then Amelia, from Amelia Reads, said, drop everything you're reading, read this. I said, okay. The plan is I'll finish A Tale from the Time Being, stop for 5 minutes to digest, and then start The World of Yesterday. Since I'm posting this next week, this already will have happened, but you get the idea. And it's good to read some nonfiction as my more paperbacky book, because I'm also reading a chunker. The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai. This is my first Kiran Desai. I haven't read The Inheritance of Loss, and it's really good so far. I've literally just read 30 pages. But so far it's really good. It's about Sonia. She has traveled from India to America to do a master's, I think, or maybe her last year of uni, but she's there. She's studying creative writing and literature, and she feels really lonely. I think it's old-timey because people call on the phone and there's no internet, I think. We'll keep going, but so far the writing is beautiful, the characters are really well drawn, and you can tell it's going to be one of these slow, simmering, long family sagas, which I thoroughly enjoy when they are well done and not too cliche, which it doesn't seem like this will be. So, in a way, bold that so much is the character just calling her family crying and the family being like, why are you lonely? Like, why are you having this reaction? You're in America, tough it up. And then obviously it's a lot about the immigrant experience, and there's already conversations about how after they finish their course, she has 1 year to get work experience, but then she'll either need a sponsor or go back to India, which so relatable. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this, but obviously I don't feel like I'll be dragging this around the tube that much. So it's good to have, sitting down book and then a more portable book. And that's all the bookish stuff I have for you today. Oh my god, I keep yapping more than I expected in these weekly videos, which have not been weekly. But I feel like, hey, there's been at least 4 of them, and it's a month and a half, sort of. So I feel comfortable saying I've kept it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, let me know if you've read any of these books, if you want to read any of these books. Let me know what you've been reading and enjoying, or just any like little life update, even if it's like I had some great dessert the other day. Don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Okay, see you next time. You're on camera.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, it's okay. Can I put this in my bloopers?